Mara Voss had learned, a long time ago, that the worst nights always start quiet. The scanner on the nurse's station crackled once, then again. Gunshot wound, male, unresponsive, ETA 4 minutes. She didn't look up from the chart in her hand. 4 minutes was nothing. 4 minutes was everything. Nurses who'd been on shift 6 hours already were dragging. Mara Voss, 4 hours into a double, was not. She didn't get tired anymore. Not really. Tired required a version of herself that still expected rest to fix something. Priya caught her eye across the station. She asked why Mara hadn't taken her break again. Mara said she didn't need one. Priya told her she never needed one, and that was the problem. Mara didn't answer. The doors slammed open before she had to. He came in with no ID, no pulse for 11 seconds, and a bullet lodged an inch from his heart. The attending called it early. They were losing him. Mara didn't believe it. Something in her, the same something she hated herself for not having 3 years ago, refused to let the numbers on the monitor be the last word. She called for the crash cart. It wasn't her call to make. She made it anyway. 90 seconds later, his heart found its rhythm again. The room exhaled. Mara didn't. She looked down at him, a stranger's face, expensive stitching on a jacket that didn't belong in this part of the city, and felt the first cold prickle of a question she wouldn't be able to put down. Who shoots a man like this and leaves no name behind? Then a security guard burst into the room. He was gone from the hallway camera feed. The second bed was empty. A man doesn't walk out of cardiac arrest. Not in 11 minutes. Not without a name, a chart, or a single question answered. But the bed was empty. The window on the second floor, the one that shouldn't open, was open. By the time Detective Ellis Grant arrived to ask about the John Doe gunshot victim, there was nothing left to show him but a blood-soaked gown and a nurse who couldn't explain why her hands were shaking. He asked if she was sure she didn't recognize him. Mara met his eyes and lied for the first time that night. She'd never seen him before in her life. She didn't know why she said it. She only knew that something about the fear in that man's chest, even unconscious, hadn't looked like guilt. It had looked like survival. Home, for Mara, was 4 walls and a photo she kept turned face down on the shelf, because looking at it cost more than she had most nights. 3 years. 3 years since 6 seconds had cost her a sister, and any right she felt she had to call herself someone who saved people. Tonight had been different. Tonight, for once, 6 seconds hadn't been enough to lose someone. She told herself that was why her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She told herself it had nothing to do with the stranger's face, or the way his eyes had opened, just for a second, just enough, and found hers before he went under again. She was still telling herself that when the knock came at her door, 3 knocks, uneven, barely there. She should have called it in. She should have picked up the phone Detective Grant had left on her counter and dialed before she even reached the door. Instead, she looked through the peephole and felt the floor tilt. It was him, upright, barely. One hand braced against her doorframe, the other pressed to a wound that had reopened somewhere between the hospital and here. His eyes found the peephole like he somehow knew she was watching. He told her he knew what he was asking, that he wouldn't be here if there was anyone else left to ask. Mara's hand hovered over the deadbolt. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office with a view of the harbor, a man in a black suit hung up a phone call and said 4 words to the room: "Find him, tonight." Back at the door, Mara made her choice. She turned the lock. Mara had pulled bullets out of people before. She had never done it on her own kitchen table, with a paring knife sterilized in vodka and a dish towel pressed so hard against a stranger's ribs that her knuckles had gone white. He didn't make a sound when she dug the fragment out. That scared her more than if he had. "You should be screaming," she said. "Screaming gets you found," he said back, and closed his eyes like that settled it. She didn't know his name yet. She'd asked 3 times. 3 times he'd given her nothing. Not a flinch, not a flicker, just a stillness that felt rehearsed, like a man reciting a rule he'd memorized a long time ago. Tell no one anything, not even the woman elbow deep in your open wound at 2 in the morning. By sunrise, he was on her couch, alive, and she was standing in her own kitchen wondering what exactly she'd just become an accomplice to. Priya noticed first, because Priya noticed everything. Mara showed up to her shift in yesterday's scrubs, and Priya took one look at her and said, "You didn't sleep." Mara said she'd had a rough night. Priya said Mara's rough nights usually came with an explanation, and this one clearly wasn't going to. She wasn't wrong. Mara said nothing at all, and for the first time in 3 years of friendship, Priya let the silence sit instead of pushing through it. That, somehow, was worse. Detective Ellis Grant came back twice that week, not with questions this time, with a photograph. A grainy still from a traffic camera 4 blocks from the hospital, time-stamped the same night as the shooting. A man in a torn jacket, moving too fast for someone who should have been in cardiac arrest. Grant slid it across the counter and watched her face instead of the picture. "Funny thing about ghosts," he said. "They don't usually run." Mara looked at the photo for exactly as long as it took to look unbothered, and not a second longer. She told him she couldn't identify a blur any better than he could. Grant let it go. He didn't believe her, and he didn't pretend to. At home, the stranger had a name for her now, though she suspected it wasn't the real one. "Damon," he said. "Just Damon." When she asked about the men who'd shot him, he gave her a story about a bad business deal, wrong people, wrong money. It was smooth, it was rehearsed, she was almost sure, a lie, but it was a good enough lie that for 4 days she let herself believe it, because believing it meant she hadn't let a dangerous man into her home for no reason at all. The 5th day she was doing laundry and found the jacket. The good one, the expensive one, the one he'd worn into her ER with a bullet in his chest. There was a tear in the lining she hadn't noticed before, and behind it, folded twice, a photograph gone soft at the creases from being carried too long. 2 men stood in it, arms around each other's shoulders, both laughing at something outside the frame. One of them was Damon, younger, lighter, a version of him that looked like he still believed the world owed him nothing, and gave freely anyway. The other man she recognized instantly because his face had been on every news channel in the city for the past 6 weeks. Charles Reyes, shipping magnate, murdered in his own study 3 months ago, case unsolved. Mara stood very still in her own hallway, the photograph shaking slightly in her hand, and understood 2 things at once. The man on her couch had a last name now, and he had been standing next to a murder victim who shared it. She didn't confront him right away. She made dinner first, because some part of her wasn't ready for whatever came after the question, and needed 5 more ordinary minutes before she asked it. When she finally set the photograph on the table between them, Damon went very quiet in a way that told her everything the photo hadn't. "That's your father," she said. Not a question. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just looked at the photograph like it belonged to someone he used to be and said the only thing he seemed willing to give her. "You don't want the rest of this story." "I already have the rest of the story bleeding on my couch," Mara said. "I want the truth to go with it." Somewhere outside, 4 floors down, a car she hadn't noticed the night before pulled up to the curb and idled with its lights off. Damon looked toward the window like he'd felt it too. "Ask me tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tonight, you need to trust me instead." Mara didn't answer. She looked at the photograph, then at the window, then at the man who still hadn't told her a single true thing about himself, and understood that whatever she chose next, there was no version of this where she got to stay uninvolved. Mara didn't sleep that night, and neither, from the sound of it, did Damon. She heard him pacing the length of her living room at 3 in the morning, slow and even, like a man measuring a cell he already knew the size of. By morning, she stopped waiting for tomorrow, the way he'd asked. She put 2 cups of coffee on the table, sat down across from him, and said nothing at all. She'd learned that much about him already. Silence worked on him better than questions did. It took 4 minutes. Then he started talking, and once he started, he didn't stop. His name wasn't just Damon, it was Damon Reyes, second son of Charles Reyes, and for 29 years that name had meant nothing but a shipping company, a harbor full of his father's containers, and a life he'd never once had to fight for. Then his father was murdered in his own study, and everything he thought he understood about his family turned out to be a story someone else had been writing the whole time. He'd been the one to find the body. He'd also been the one the police liked best for it, until, 3 days later, someone leaked evidence that put him somewhere else entirely, and the case went quiet, and his older brother stepped smoothly into their father's chair like he'd been waiting for the seat to be warm. "Vincent," Damon said, and the name came out of him like something spat, not spoken. "My brother didn't inherit the company. He arranged to." Mara asked the question she already knew the answer to. She asked who had put the bullet in him. Damon looked at her for a long moment before he answered, like he was deciding how much truth she could carry without it becoming dangerous to hold. "I found something," he said. "Records. Enough to prove Vincent paid for what happened to our father, and paid again to make sure I took the blame for it. I was 3 hours from handing it to a federal prosecutor when his men found me first. Your own brother tried to have you killed." "My own brother succeeded," Damon said quietly. "For about 11 seconds. You're the reason he didn't finish the job." The words sat between them, too large for the small kitchen. Mara thought of the crash cart, the flatline, the 90 seconds she'd refused to accept as an ending euro, and understood, for the first time, exactly what she'd pulled back across that line. She wanted to ask what happened to the evidence. She never got the chance. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A text from Priya, sent from the hospital. 4 words that made the room go cold. "Someone's asking about you." Mara called her back immediately. Priya's voice was low, rushed, the sound of someone trying not to be overheard. A man had come to the front desk that morning, well-dressed, polite in the specific way that made your skin crawl, asking which nurse had caught the John Doe gunshot case 2 weeks back. He hadn't given a name. He'd given Priya a card instead, blank except for a phone number, and told her to pass it along if her friend remembered anything else. "He knew your badge number, Mara," Priya said. "He said it before I did." Mara hung up and looked at Damon, who had already gone still in the particular way she now recognized as fear wearing the shape of calm. "They traced you through the hospital," he said. "That means they have your name. Your address won't be far behind." "How long?" "Hours? Maybe less." Mara crossed to the window before she'd decided to, some old instinct pulling her there faster than thought. 4 floors down, parked at the curb where it had idled once already, sat a black car with its engine running and its windows dark. It hadn't been there an hour ago. It hadn't needed to be. Now it simply was, patient, unhurried, the way a predator waits when it already knows the exit has been covered. Damon came to stand beside her, close enough that she felt the tension radiating off him like heat off pavement. "That's them," he said. "What do they want?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had dropped to something almost gentle, which frightened her more than anger would have. "You," he said. "Now, not just me." Below them, the car's headlights clicked on